The universe operates on timeless laws. From a single mote of dust, a galaxy can form. From a single drop of water, an ocean can begin. And from a small, nameless tribe on the windswept plains of Anatolia, a fateful seed was planted. From this seed, an empire would rise. A great tree whose branches would cast a shadow over 3 continents: Asia, Europe, and Africa. This is not merely a story of conquest. It is the chronicle of a single bloodline, the House of Osman. A 600-year saga of ambition, faith, brutality, and glory. It is a game of thrones played across generations where each sultan was a player and the board was the civilized world. History is often written by the victors, but the truth is a more complex tapestry. The story of the Ottomans is one of grand paradoxes. A dynasty of devout Ghazi warriors, holy fighters for Islam, who presided over an empire of stunning religious and cultural diversity. A civilization that produced magnificent legal codes and immortal architecture, yet was built upon the brutal institutions of military slavery and legalized fratricide. They were the protectors of Sunni Islam, the custodians of its holy cities. And yet they were the terror of Christian Europe, the great adversary at the gates of Vienna. They were conquerors, but they were also builders. They were a destructive force and a civilizing one. Our journey today will pierce the heart of this empire. We will not simply recount the battles, but dissect the minds of the men who held absolute power. We will walk the halls of their palaces, listen to the whispers in the harem, and witness the decisions that shaped entire eras. From the founder Osman I, a tribal chieftain with a dream of an empire, to the last sultan, Mehmed VI, who watched a 600-year legacy crumble into the ashes of the First World War. This is the story of absolute power and its absolute cost. Welcome to Dynast Saga. Welcome to the Chronicle of the House of Osman. Every great dynasty begins with a story. For the House of Osman, it begins with a dream. Legend tells us that Osman, as a young man, saw a vision in his sleep. He saw a moon emerge from the chest of a holy man and enter his own. Then from his navel, a great tree sprouted. Its branches grew and grew until its shade encompassed the entire world. Its roots drawing strength from the great rivers of the Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, and Danube, and its leaves shaped like scimitars. Was this a divine prophecy, a sign that his descendants were destined to rule the earth? Or was it a brilliant piece of political propaganda crafted later to legitimize a meteoric rise from obscurity? The truth is lost to time. But the dream became a self-fulfilling prophecy. It poses the central question of this era. How did this small tribe, one of dozens scrambling for survival in a land of chaos, become the heir to the Caesars of Rome and the caliphs of Baghdad? To understand the rise of the Ottomans is to first understand the world into which they were born. Late 13th century Anatolia was a graveyard of empires. The once mighty Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, which had ruled the region for 2 centuries, had been shattered by the Mongol invasions in 1243. The Mongol Ilkhanate, its successor, was itself beginning to fracture, its authority waning. And to the west, the great Byzantine Empire was a hollow shadow of its former glory, mortally wounded by the Western Knights of the Fourth Crusade in 1204. It was a dysfunctional state plagued by civil wars, its emperors barely controlling the ancient capital of Constantinople and a few scattered territories. This collapse of authority created a power vacuum, a chaotic and violent frontier zone where only the strong and the cunning could survive. This was the age of the Beyliks, dozens of Turkic principalities that rose from the Seljuk ashes. The Ottomans were not the strongest. They were dwarfed by powerful rivals like the Karamanids and the Germanids, who saw themselves as the true successors to the Seljuks. The Ottomans were merely a minor player on a crowded stage. But Osman, son of the tribal leader Ertugrul, held a decisive advantage: location. His small domain centered on the town of Sagat was pressed right against the decaying frontier of the Byzantine Empire. This made him a Ghazi, a warrior for Islam. For the countless footless warriors, mystics and nomads of Anatolia, the Ghazi ideal was a powerful magnet. It offered a divine purpose and the promise of worldly spoils. Raiding the lands of the infidels was not merely plunder. It was a sacred duty. Osman harnessed this potent ideology. His strategy was not one of grand-pitched battles which he would have lost. Instead, he pursued a patient war of attrition, of ambushes, of blockades, and slow strangulation of Byzantine forts. In 1299 he captured the fortress of Bilsik, securing his position and, according to tradition, marking the founding moment of his state. He was a pragmatist, a master of opportunistic expansion, slowly and steadily carving out a state from the soft underbelly of a dying empire. This relentless forward momentum passed seamlessly to his son, Orhan. The culmination of Osman's life's work was the decade-long siege of the great Byzantine city of Bursa. It is said that Osman on his deathbed was able to hear the news that the city had finally fallen in the year 1326. Its capture was a monumental achievement. Bursa was not simply sacked and abandoned. Orhan made it his capital. Was this truly a sign of decay? Or was it a testament to the strange, adaptive resilience of the Ottoman system itself? It was a system where power, when blocked in one channel, simply carved a new and more dangerous riverbed. This unprecedented transfer of authority was not an accident. It was the result of three fundamental changes in the structure of the Ottoman state, changes that began even under Suleiman the Magnificent. The first was the end of the age of easy expansion. By the late 16th century, the empire's borders had largely stabilized against powerful, entrenched enemies like the Habsburgs in Europe and the Safavids in Persia. This had a profound effect on the role of the Sultan. For centuries, the Sultan's primary source of legitimacy had been his role as a Ghazi, a warrior king who personally led his armies to victory. But with fewer glorious campaigns to command, the sultans began to retreat from the battlefield and public life, withdrawing into the secluded luxury and ritualized ceremony of the Topkapi Palace. The warrior king was replaced by the palace-bound sovereign. This physical withdrawal created a vacuum of active leadership at the very top of the imperial structure. The second change was a direct response to the brutal law of fratricide. As centuries passed, the practice of a new sultan executing all his brothers came to be seen as not only barbaric but dangerously wasteful, wiping out the dynasty's spare heirs in a single stroke. It was gradually replaced by a system that was, in its own way, just as cruel: the Kafes, or the cage. Instead of being killed, the brothers and nephews of the reigning sultan were now confined for life to a set of opulent but isolated apartments within the harem. They lived a life of gilded imprisonment, surrounded by luxury but cut off from the outside world. They had no administrative training, no military experience, and lived under the constant shadow of the executioner's bowstring. The cage solved the problem of civil wars, but it created a new, insidious one. It began to produce catastrophically flawed rulers. When a prince was finally called to the throne, often after decades of paranoid confinement, he was typically psychologically damaged, hopelessly inexperienced, and utterly incapable of governing a vast empire. With a weak or incompetent sultan on the throne, who would fill the vacuum? The answer was almost always the one person who had known the new ruler his entire life, the one person he trusted, and the one person with a vested interest in his survival: his mother. This was the dawn of the age of the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother. By default, the Valide became the most powerful individual in the empire. As the matriarch of the dynasty, she commanded immense respect and controlled a vast personal fortune. As the head of the harem, she managed a complex political ecosystem. Most importantly, she had the ear of her son. These powerful mothers formed alliances with grand viziers and generals, effectively ruling the empire as regents. The era of the great sultans had ended. The era of the great mothers had begun. The path to this new world was blazed by Hurrem Sultan. By transitioning from slave to legal wife, she carved out an institutional space for female power. The generation after Hurrem saw her model perfected by two formidable women. The first was Nurbanu Sultan, a woman of Venetian noble birth who became the effective head of government for nearly 2 decades under her husband Selim II and son Murad III. Power then passed to her rival, Safavi Sultan, whose influence was legendary. Safavi controlled imperial appointments and ran her own foreign policy, even exchanging letters with Queen Elizabeth I of England. This trend reached its absolute apex with the rise of the single most powerful woman in Ottoman history, Kozum Sultan. Her extraordinary career spanned the reigns of 6 different sultans. She began as the beloved consort of Ahmed I, but her true power emerged as the Valide Sultan and official regent for her sons, Murad IV and Ibrahim the Mad. When the court finally deposed the unstable Ibrahim, Kozum achieved something unprecedented. She placed her 7-year-old grandson, Mehmed IV, on the throne and declared herself regent for a 3rd time, taking the title Bayak Valide, Grand Valide. For nearly 3 decades, Kozum was the empress of the Ottoman world. But this consolidation of power could not last. She had a rival, the mother of the child sultan, a young and ambitious woman named Turhan Hadisi. Turhan believed that she, not her aging mother-in-law, was the rightful regent. A bitter, deadly power struggle erupted. The climax came in September 1651. Kozum, feeling her influence slipping, allegedly hatched a plot to poison her grandson Mehmed and replace him with a more pliable prince. Turhan was warned. In the middle of the night, Turhan's loyalists, led by the chief black eunuch, stormed the harem. They hunted down the 60-year-old Kozum, dragging her from a hiding place and strangling her, some say with a curtain from her own chamber. The murder of the most powerful woman the empire had ever known marked the bloody end of the Sultanate of Women. Power now shifted to a dynasty of iron-willed grand viziers, the Koprulu family, who temporarily restored order. However, the erosion of the Sultan's personal authority had left deep scars. The office once held by titans was now often occupied by figureheads. By the dawn of the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire was like a colossal, ancient war machine. Forged in the fires of medieval conquest, it was still immense, but its gears were rusted with tradition. It was no longer facing feudal kingdoms, but a new Europe transformed by the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. In 1683, the Ottomans launched a second Great Siege of Vienna. It was a catastrophic failure that triggered a response unlike any the empire had ever faced. A new Holy League of Austria, Poland, Venice, and Russia launched a counteroffensive. The resulting Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 was a moment of profound humiliation. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire was decisively defeated and forced to cede vast territories, including Hungary. The myth of Ottoman invincibility was shattered. The world had changed. To the north, Russia, under rulers like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, had transformed into a military juggernaut fueled by imperial ambition. The Ottoman war machine, meanwhile, had stalled. The Janissary Corps, once the most feared infantry in the world, had degenerated into a privileged, hereditary social club, more concerned with business interests than military discipline. They became a dangerous conservative lobby, resisting any reform that threatened their status. For the sultans in Istanbul, the lesson was brutal. Reform was no longer a choice but a matter of survival. The first sultan to fully grasp this was Selim III, who ascended the throne in 1789. Inspired by European developments, he launched the Nizam-i-Sedid New Order, a modern European-style army equipped with flintlock muskets and trained in modern tactics. Selim saw this as the empire's salvation, but the Janissaries saw it as their death warrant. In 1807 they revolted, deposed Selim, and eventually murdered him. The man who learned from Selim's tragedy was his cousin Mahmud II. Where Selim had been an idealist, Mahmud was a patient, cunning pragmatist. For 18 years he moved with caution, quietly placing loyalists in key positions and building a modern artillery corps loyal only to him. He was setting a trap. That trap sprung in June 1826. Mahmud deliberately provoked the Janissaries by announcing a new military structure. Predictably, they revolted, marching on the palace and overturning their soup kettles, their traditional signal of rebellion. But Mahmud was ready. He unfurled the sacred banner of the Prophet, rallying the people against the traitors. He then ordered his new artillery to open fire on the Janissary barracks. What followed was a massacre. The barracks were pounded into rubble. Those who fled were cut down. By the end of the day, the Janissary Corps, an institution that had defined the empire for 500 years, ceased to exist. This event was officially named the Vakar-i-Hayrai, the auspicious incident. The greatest obstacle to reform had been annihilated in a storm of cannon fire. With his hands free, Mahmud II unleashed the Tanzimat reforms, abolishing the old order and laying the desperate foundations for a modern state. The empire was fighting for its life, and the old world was burning away. He was attempting to remake the entire Ottoman state from the top down. The reforms of Selim III and Mahmud II were nothing short of a revolution from above, a desperate attempt by the dynasty to save itself by fundamentally altering the state it had created. In this, they were partially successful. The creation of a modern centralized bureaucracy and a new conscripted army undoubtedly prolonged the life of the empire. Without Mahmud's brutal destruction of the Janissaries and the subsequent Tanzimat reforms, the state would almost certainly have fractured and collapsed much sooner under the immense pressure of European military superiority and internal decay. The patient had been given emergency surgery that saved its life, but the underlying disease remained. The core problem was that these reforms were always reactive, not proactive. They were a frantic effort to catch up with a Europe that was itself constantly and rapidly accelerating into the future through industrialization, nationalism, and technological innovation. The Ottomans were trying to close a gap that was perpetually widening. The reforms were a necessary treatment for the symptoms of decline, but they could never cure the cause. But the most profound and ironic legacy of this era was one the sultans never intended. In order to build their new armies and their new bureaucracy, they had to create a new kind of Ottoman subject. They founded Western-style military academies, medical schools, and civil service colleges. In these schools, a new generation of young Ottomans learned to speak French. They studied science and engineering, and they read the great thinkers of the European Enlightenment. In doing so, they absorbed a host of new and radical ideas: liberalism, constitutionalism, popular sovereignty, and secularism. This new class of westernized intellectuals, bureaucrats, and officers, who would become known as the Young Ottomans, looked at the empire's problems and came to a very different conclusion than their masters. They believed that the problem was not just an outdated army, but the entire system of absolute monarchy itself. The solution, they argued, was not simply better technology, but a constitution that would limit the sultan's power and a parliament that would represent the diverse peoples of the empire. And so, the great irony of the age of reform was this: the sultans, in a desperate bid to save their own absolute power, had inadvertently created the very intellectual class that would soon demand that this absolute power be dismantled forever. Few figures in Ottoman history are as controversial or as misunderstood as the 34th Sultan, Abdul Hamid II. In the memory of the West, he is the Red Sultan or Bloody Sultan, a paranoid reactionary tyrant, a caricature of Oriental despotism who presided over horrific massacres. But to his many admirers then and now, he was Ulu Hakan, the Great Khan, the Caliph of all Muslims, a pious and cunning ruler who skillfully resisted the predatory ambitions of the European powers and championed a global Islamic identity. The truth, as always, is a paradox. Abdul Hamid was an arch-conservative autocrat who despised Western liberalism and ruthlessly crushed all opposition with a fearsome network of spies and secret police. And yet, the same man was one of the empire's greatest modernizers. He was a ruler who oversaw a dramatic expansion of railways, telegraphs, and modern secular schools. His reign is the story of the dynasty's final, desperate attempt to save a multi-ethnic empire in an age of nationalism by centralizing all power into the hands of a single, absolute, and all-seeing monarch. The empire Abdul Hamid inherited in 1876 was in a state of terminal crisis. The Tanzimat reforms, while necessary, had been enormously expensive, as had been a series of disastrous wars. To fund this, the government had taken on massive loans from European banks. By the mid-1870s, the Ottoman state could no longer even pay the interest on its debts. In 1875, it declared sovereign bankruptcy. The result was a profound national humiliation. In 1881, the European powers forced the Sultan to accept the creation of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration (OPDA). This was a vast bureaucracy controlled by foreign bondholders that was given direct authority over huge swathes of the Ottoman economy. It collected taxes on everything from salt and silk to tobacco and stamps, redirecting the revenue to European banks. The Ottoman Empire was no longer a fully sovereign state. Its finances, the very lifeblood of its government, were now being managed by its foreign creditors. While the state was rotting from financial insolvency, its body was being torn apart by a new and potent political poison: nationalism. This was the revolutionary idea born in Europe that a people bound by a common language, ethnicity, and religion constituted a nation, and that every nation had the right to its own independent state. For a vast multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire like the Ottomans, this idea was an existential threat. Throughout the 19th century, it had sparked a series of bloody revolts among the empire's Christian subjects in the Balkans. The Greeks had won their independence in the 1820s, followed by the Serbs, Romanians, and Montenegrins. Now, in the 1870s, a new wave of uprisings swept through Bosnia and Bulgaria. These revolts were actively encouraged by an expansionist Russia, which cynically used its self-proclaimed role as the protector of Orthodox Christians as a pretext to weaken the empire and advance its own strategic aims. This convergence of internal decay and external pressure gave rise to what European diplomats called the Eastern Question, the thorny problem of how to manage the seemingly inevitable collapse of the Ottoman Empire without triggering a catastrophic war among themselves. Each of the great powers had a stake in the outcome. Great Britain, fearing Russian expansion towards its prize colony of India, generally sought to prop up the sick man of Europe as a buffer. Russia sought to dismantle it, dreaming of controlling the Straits and Constantinople. Austria-Hungary wanted to expand its own empire into the Ottoman Balkans. France had its own financial and colonial interests. The fate of the empire was no longer in its own hands. It had become a pawn on a global chessboard, its future debated and decided not in Istanbul, but in the foreign ministries of London, Paris, and St. Petersburg. It was into this perfect storm of bankruptcy, nationalist rebellion, and crushing international pressure that Sultan Abdul Hamid II was thrust onto the throne. Abdul Hamid came to the throne not by choice. but by the will of the very reformers he would come to despise. In 1876, the great reformist minister Midhat Pasha and his allies deposed two sultans in a matter of months, finally placing Abdul Hamid in power on the condition that he accept their revolutionary project, the Ottoman Constitution of 1876. It was the first written constitution in the history of any Islamic nation, a document that promised an elected parliament, an independent judiciary, and fundamental rights for all citizens. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed the empire was on the path to becoming a constitutional monarchy. But Abdul Hamid was no liberal. He saw the constitution as a naive experiment and a dangerous concession. He played along only as long as he had to. In 1877, a disastrous war with Russia gave him the pretext he needed. Citing a state of emergency, he suspended the constitution, dissolved the parliament, and sent Midhat Pasha into exile, where he was later strangled on the Sultan's orders. The first Ottoman experiment with democracy was over in less than 2 years. For the next 30 years, Abdul Hamid would rule alone, an absolute autocrat accountable to no one but himself. With all power now concentrated in his hands, Abdul Hamid pursued a deeply paradoxical strategy of simultaneous repression and modernization. Terrified of assassination and coups, he retreated from the public eye, ruling from the seclusion of his heavily guarded Yildiz palace. From there, he built one of the most sophisticated police states of the 19th century. He established a vast network of spies and informers, the Kafes, who permeated every level of society, reporting directly and only to him. He imposed an iron-fisted censorship over the press, banning words like liberty, constitution, and even Armenia. Any hint of dissent was ruthlessly crushed. This paranoia and autocracy had a bloody side, most notoriously in the series of massacres perpetrated against the empire's Armenian population in the mid-1890s, which earned him the permanent stain of the Red Sultan in the Western press. Yet, this same paranoid tyrant was also one of the empire's most energetic modernizers. He believed he could adopt the West technology without its dangerous political ideas. He oversaw a massive expansion of the telegraph system, which he used as a tool of surveillance to control his empire in real time. He championed the construction of railways, most famously the Hejaz Railway, a marvel of engineering designed to connect Damascus with the holy city of Medina, strengthening his claim as caliph. And most ironically, he founded thousands of new modern secular schools to train the doctors, engineers, and army officers his state so desperately needed. He was trying to build a modern, efficient, technologically advanced empire, all to serve the preservation of his own ancient, absolute power. But in the end, his own policies created the very force that would bring him down. The thousands of young men who graduated from his new military academies and civil service schools had been trained as modern men. They read forbidden European books. They understood the empire's humiliating weakness, and they burned with a new, intense form of Turkish nationalism. From this generation, a new revolutionary movement was born, the Committee of Union and Progress (CUP), better known as the Young Turks. These were not the debating society intellectuals of the previous generation. They were determined army officers and hardened conspirators who believed that only a revolution could save the state. The final act began in the summer of 1908. Young Turk officers in the Ottoman Third Army stationed in Macedonia launched a revolt, demanding the restoration of the constitution. The rebellion spread like wildfire through the army, the very institution Abdul Hamid had tried so hard to modernize and control. Faced with the complete collapse of his military authority and the threat of a civil war, the old sultan had no choice but to capitulate. On July 24, 1908, he announced that the Constitution of 1876 was once again in effect. The news sparked euphoric, delirious celebrations across the empire as citizens of all religions embraced in the streets. The autocrat had been defeated by the modern world he had helped to build. Although he would attempt a brief counter-revolution the following year, it was too late. In 1909, the Young Turk-controlled parliament voted to depose him for good, ending his 33-year reign. From his own perspective, Abdul Hamid's reign was a success. He inherited a state that was bankrupt, militarily defeated, and on the verge of being carved up by the great powers of Europe. Through 33 years of tireless micromanagement, diplomatic cunning, and sheer force of will, he held that crumbling empire together. He masterfully played his European rivals against one another, preventing any single power from delivering a fatal blow. He modernized the state's infrastructure and educational system on an unprecedented scale, and he championed a powerful ideology of pan-Islamism that rallied Muslims both inside and outside his borders to his role as caliph. He was the great survivor in an age that had already written the empire's obituary. He single-handedly postponed its final death for more than a generation. By any measure, it was a remarkable, if brutal, achievement. But history's judgment is one of supreme and tragic irony. The very methods Abdul Hamid used to save the empire were the ones that guaranteed its ultimate destruction. His reliance on absolute centralized autocracy was a fatal miscalculation. By suppressing all forms of moderate political dissent, by shuttering parliament and crushing any calls for liberty, he ensured that the only opposition that could possibly emerge was a radical, secretive, and revolutionary one. The Young Turks, with their conspiratorial cells and ruthless methods, were a mirror image of the paranoid system he himself had created. In his final, fatal irony, the schools he built to train loyal modern officials became the very incubators of the revolution that overthrew him. In his desperate attempt to save the 600-year-old absolute monarchy of the House of Osman from the modern world, Abdul Hamid inadvertently educated and forged the very generation of men who would not only depose him, but who just over a decade later would abolish the Sultanate and the empire itself forever. The long, desperate race against time was finally over. History had delivered its verdict. The great tree of Osman, which had once shaded the world, was now a dead and broken thing, its branches shattered by the industrial storm of the First World War. Into this landscape of ruin and ashes stepped the 36th and final Sultan, Mehmed VI. He was not a conqueror, a lawgiver, or even a tyrant. He was a postscript, a ghost presiding over the funeral of his own empire. The story of the dynasty's final years is not a story of its actions, but of its reactions. For 6 centuries, the House of Osman had been a great actor on the world stage, shaping the fates of millions. Now it was merely an object, its destiny to be decided by 2 new and powerful forces: the victorious Allied powers who occupied its capital, and a new defiant spirit of national resistance rising from the Anatolian heartland. The question was no longer how the empire would survive. The only question left was how it would end. The road to ruin had been paved by the Young Turks. After their revolution in 1908, true power rested not with the Sultan, but with a dictatorial triumvirate of Young Turk leaders known as the Three Pashas. In 1914, these men made a fatal gamble. Hoping to escape the financial domination of Britain and France and win back territory from their old enemy, Russia, they led the Ottoman Empire into the First World War on the side of Germany and the Central Powers. It was a desperate bid to restore the empire to its former glory. Instead, it led to 4 years of unimaginable suffering and total collapse. The empire fought and bled on multiple fronts, from the snowy mountains of the Caucasus against Russia to the burning deserts of Mesopotamia against the British. The darkest chapter of the war was the Armenian genocide, a systematic campaign of deportation and murder carried out by the Young Turk regime that resulted in the deaths of over 1 million people. The one moment of true Ottoman glory was the heroic and bloody defense of the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1915, a victory that repelled an Allied invasion and made a national hero of a brilliant and determined army officer named Mustafa Kemal. But one victory could not turn the tide. By the autumn of 1918, the empire was exhausted, its armies shattered, its people starving. In October, the Ottoman government signed the Armistice of Mudros, effectively surrendering to the Allies. What followed was a national catastrophe that eclipsed any previous defeat. The victorious Allied powers, Britain, France, Italy, and Greece, did what no enemy had done since 1453. They occupied Constantinople. British warships anchored in the Bosphorus, their guns aimed at the Sultan's palace. For the first time in over 4 centuries, the city of the Caliph was under the control of Christian armies. It was into this nightmare of defeat and occupation that Mehmed VI had come to the throne just a few months earlier. He was a sultan in name only, a prisoner in his own palace, his government completely at the mercy of the Allied high commissioners who now ran his capital. The final crushing blow came in 1920 with the Treaty of Sèvres. It was not a peace treaty, it was a death sentence. The treaty carved up what was left of the empire, giving lands to Greece and Armenia, establishing French and British protectorates in Syria, Palestine, and Iraq, and putting the strategic straits under international control. All that was left for the Turks was a small, powerless rump state in central Anatolia. For the Sultan's helpless government in occupied Istanbul, there was no choice but to sign. 4 million of Turks watching from the heartland, however, this was not a peace to be accepted. It was a humiliation to be resisted. While the Sultan's government in Istanbul bowed to the will of the Allies, a new and defiant power was stirring in the Anatolian heartland. Its leader was Mustafa Kemal, the hero of Gallipoli. He was the ultimate product of the past century of Ottoman change, a graduate of the modern military schools, a veteran of the Young Turk Revolution, a secular nationalist, and a brilliant, ruthless, and entirely pragmatic general. Dispatched to Anatolia by the Sultan to oversee the army's demobilization, Kemal did the exact opposite. He defied his orders and began to organize a national resistance movement against the Allied occupation and the humiliating terms of the peace. In 1920, in the dusty central Anatolian city of Ankara, far from the reach of Allied guns, Kemal and his fellow nationalists established the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. This was a new, revolutionary rival government. It declared that the Sultan and his ministers were puppets of the enemy and that the Treaty of Sèvres was null and void. This act drew a final, irreconcilable line in the sand. A civil war now raged for the soul of the Turkish people. In one corner was the old world, the 600-year-old dynasty of Osman, the Sultan Caliph in occupied Istanbul, his authority backed by the might of the victorious Allied powers. In the other corner was the New World, the Turkish nation itself, embodied by a provisional government in Ankara led by a charismatic general. The conflict that followed, the Turkish War of Independence, was a brutal multi-front struggle for survival. Kemal's nascent nationalist armies had to fight the French in the south and Armenian forces in the east. But the main existential struggle was against an invading Greek army, which landed in the west with Allied encouragement, seeking to enforce the Treaty of Sèvres and carve out its own empire from the Anatolian coast. The Sultan's government, under Allied pressure, officially condemned Kemal's movement. The Sheikh al-Islam, the highest religious authority in Istanbul, issued a fatwa declaring the nationalists to be rebels against the Caliph, making it a sacred duty for pious Muslims to kill them. The House of Osman was now officially at war with the Turkish nation. But the nation, forged in the fires of defeat, would not be denied. Under Kemal's brilliant command, the nationalist forces fought the Greeks to a standstill at the bloody Battle of the Sakarya in 1921. Then in August of 1922, Kemal launched his great offensive, a surprise attack that shattered the Greek lines and drove their army into a headlong retreat to the sea. In September, Turkish cavalry rode into the great port city of Izmir, ending the Greek occupation and effectively winning the war. The victorious allies, faced with a new powerful and defiant Turkish state, had no choice but to scrap the Treaty of Sara and negotiate with the man they had once dismissed as a rebel. Mustafa Kemal was now the undisputed master of Turkey. The Sultan in his palace was an irrelevant ghost. The end when it came was swift, quiet, and bureaucratic. With the war won, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara moved to consolidate its victory and abolish the old world for good. On the 1st of November 1922, the Assembly passed a law that separated the Caliphate from the Sultanate and then in a second clause abolished the office of the Sultan entirely. After 623 years, 36 rulers, and a history that had shaped the world, the reign of the House of Osman was terminated not by a great battle, but by a simple vote. There was no storming of the palace, no final stand, no dramatic execution. The most powerful monarchy of the early modern world had simply become obsolete. A few days later, Mehmed VI, the last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and the last of the Caesars, fearing for his life, requested protection from the British. In the early morning hours of November 17th, he slipped out of his palace, was taken to a waiting British warship, the HMS Malaya, and was carried into exile. He would die in obscurity in Italy a few years later. The great dynasty had vanished with a whimper. The abolition of the Sultanate was not just the end of an empire. It was the birth of a nation. Nearly a year later, in October of 1923, the Republic of Turkey was officially proclaimed with its capital at Ankara. Mustafa Kemal became its first president, and he would soon be granted the honorific title Ataturk, Father of the Turks. The old imperial multi-ethnic dynastic state built by Osman's dream was dead. In its place stood a new entity forged in the crucible of war, a modern secular Turkish nation-state. The curtain had finally descended. Music, 623 years, 36 sultans, one dynasty. As we look back upon the colossal wreck of the Ottoman Empire, what remains? What lessons can be drawn from its ashes? The first legacy is that of a remarkably durable synchric state. For centuries, the Ottomans presided over a vast multi-ethnic and multi-religious world with a pragmatic system of governance. Through their millet system, Christian and Jewish communities were allowed a significant degree of autonomy to manage their own religious and civil affairs. It was not a system born of modern liberal ideals, but of practical necessity. Yet, while Europe was tearing itself apart in centuries of brutal religious warfare, the Ottoman lands, for the most part, enjoyed a stable, if unequal, coexistence. Their second legacy is the perfection of the centralized military state. The empire was a machine built for war where all institutions from the courts of law to the tax collectors were ultimately designed to serve the needs of a perpetually expanding frontier. This created a model of absolutism that was incredibly effective in its prime. But its very rigidity made it deeply resistant to the changes required for survival in a new era. And finally, there is the legacy of the cultural bridge. Standing at the crossroads of continents, the empire was a great crucible. A place where the artistic, intellectual, and culinary traditions of the Turkic, Persian, Arab, and European worlds met, clashed, and fused into something new and unique. A civilization whose influence can still be seen and felt across the globe today. But the story of the House of Osman is more than just the story of one dynasty. It is a perfect and timeless illustration of the great cyclical law that governs all empires. Empires, like living things, are born, they grow, they mature, and they die. They are born in a moment of explosive energetic expansion like the fiery conquests of the early Gotsi warriors. They reach a period of magnificent maturity and equilibrium like the golden age of Suleiman, where their power and complexity are in perfect balance. But that very size and complexity creates sclerosis. The institutions that made the empire great become rigid and resistant to change. The arteries of the state harden. Internal decay, corruption, courtly intrigue, the failure of leadership begins to set in, while new energetic rivals and new disruptive ideas like nationalism rise on the frontiers. Eventually, the organism grows too old, too slow, and too weak to adapt. It succumbs to internal disease and external shocks, and its mighty body falls, becoming the fertile ground from which new nations like the Republic of Turkey will grow. The rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire is not a unique tragedy. It is a universal lesson, a story written in the stars as much as in the history books. All that rises must inevitably fall. The Ottomans built an empire on conquest and faith. But at the same time, in the heart of Europe, another family was mastering a different path to power, building a global empire, not with the sword but with the wedding certificate. Their motto was, "Let others wage war. You happy Austria marry?" Next time on Dynast Saga, we will explore the incredible history of the House of Habsburg, the dynasty that ruled Europe through cunning diplomacy and the power of the marriage bed. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this chronicle valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to Dynast Saga so you don't miss our next chapter in the timeless story of power. Thanks for watching. This was the pivotal moment of transformation. The capture of a major urban center signaled a new ambition, a shift from the logic of a nomadic war band to the necessities of a settled state. Bursa would become the crucible, the first great workshop where the foundations of the Ottoman state, its government, its armies, and its identity would be forged. With a capital city came a fundamental conflict, a challenge that has confronted every nomadic conqueror in history. The warrior who conquers a city must then learn to govern it. The skills are not the same. Orhan, the son of the Gotsi, now had to become a statesman. He began laying the institutional foundations of an empire. He established the Divan, a council of state to formalize governance. He created the office of the Grand Vizier, a chief minister to run the administration, allowing him to delegate power effectively. He minted the first Ottoman silver coins, the Aki, a definitive declaration of sovereignty that announced his state was no longer a mere tribal confederation. And in the newly conquered city of Iznik, he established the first Ottoman madrasa, an Islamic college. This was a signal that the state was now a patron of law, theology, and learning. The warrior on horseback was now also a sultan on a throne, building an administration designed to outlast him. The focus was shifting from the fleeting glories of the raid to the permanent structures of the state. This transformation demanded a similar revolution in military affairs. The Gotsi warriors who had fueled the early expansion were a double-edged sword. Their loyalty was often to charismatic leaders and the promise of plunder, not to an abstract state. They were excellent for fast-moving raids, but unreliable for the long grinding sieges that state-building required. Orhan needed an army that was disciplined, professional, and loyal only to him. His first solution was to create the Yaya infantry and Muzellam cavalry, regular soldiers paid from the state treasury. But his ultimate solution, refined by his successor, Murad I, was something far more radical, a stroke of cruel and calculated genius, the Janissaries. This was the infamous devshirme, a blood tax. Periodically, Ottoman officials would sweep through the Christian villages of the Balkans, and levy a tribute of their strongest and most intelligent young boys. These children were taken from their families, brought to the capital, converted to Islam, and brutally trained for a single purpose, to serve the Sultan. They were forbidden to marry, stripped of all family ties, and knew no loyalty but to the person of their master. They were in effect the Sultan's personal slaves. But they were the most privileged and powerful slaves in the world, an elite force that would become the cornerstone of Ottoman military might for centuries. It was a solution both brilliant and monstrous, creating an unstoppable army while planting a dangerous seed of power at the very heart of the state. The climax of this founding era arrived not with the roar of a great battle, but with the roar of the earth itself. In 1354, a violent earthquake struck the Gallipoli Peninsula, shattering the formidable walls of its Byzantine fortresses. Orhan's ambitious son, Suleiman Pasha, was nearby. He saw the hand of God not in the destruction but in the opportunity. He immediately led his troops across the Dardanelles Strait and occupied the ruined city. When a Byzantine envoy protested claiming the city was theirs, an Ottoman commander is said to have replied, "God who gives all things has given this city to us." This was the moment of destiny. The Ottomans now possessed their first permanent foothold in Europe. This was not a raid from which they would retreat. This was a foundation upon which they would build. The door to the rich lands of the Balkans and ultimately to the heart of Europe itself was now wide open. The long road to Vienna began here on a day of seismic terror and swift ruthless opportunism. Osman dreamt a dream. Orhan made it a reality. Osman was the spirit of the enterprise, the charismatic Ghazi chieftain who provided the inspiration and the cause. Then Orhan was its architect, the clear-eyed pragmatist who designed the machinery of state. Together, their legacy was not conquest alone, but the creation of a uniquely effective hybrid state. Their genius lay in their pragmatism, their willingness to borrow and adapt from any and all sources. They blended the fierce warrior traditions of their Turkic nomadic ancestors with the sophisticated administrative methods of the Persians and the Seljuks. They adopted the tax systems, the military organization, and even the court rituals of the Byzantine Empire they were in the process of dismantling. They took what worked, regardless of its origin, and forged it into something new. They had created a flexible, centralized, and brutally efficient state machine, fueled by religious zeal, but guided by practical reason. The seed that had been planted in Osman's prophetic dream was now a sturdy sapling, its roots gripping the soil of both Anatolia and Europe with equal tenacity. The great tree was now ready to grow, and its shadow was beginning to lengthen. With the foundations of the state now secure, the stage was set for a new kind of ruler. Sultan Mehmed II was a man apart from his ancestors. He was no simple Ghazi warrior. He was a true Renaissance prince raised in the palace. Fluent in multiple languages, a student of classical history who read tales of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. But within this educated man burned a cold, singular, and all-consuming fire, the obsession with Constantinople. To the Turks, the city was the Kuzul Elmer, the red apple, the ultimate prize of mythic proportions. For over 1,000 years, it had stood as the capital of the Roman Empire, the impregnable bastion of Eastern Christendom. Army after army, Kafe after Kafe, had tried to take it and failed. For Mehmed, the city was more than a strategic objective. It was his destiny. To conquer Constantinople was to fulfill an Islamic prophecy to eclipse the glory of all his forefathers and to finally claim the mantle of the Roman Caesars for himself. The world had a new emperor and he would have his Rome. This was not Mehmed's first taste of power. He had briefly ruled as a boy only to be deposed by a powerful court faction led by the Grand Vizier Sandallah Halil Pasha, who deemed him too arrogant and dangerously ambitious. That humiliation festered, forging in the young prince an iron will to prove his doubters wrong. When his father Murad II died in 1451, Mehmed returned to the throne at the age of 19. This time there would be no mistakes. He immediately consolidated his power with a chilling act of ruthlessness. He ordered his infant half-brother drowned in his bath using the pretext of state stability to eliminate a potential rival. It was a cold-blooded declaration that the new sultan was bound by no law but his own will. The boy who had been dismissed was now a man, and he was determined to achieve the impossible. His intentions were made terrifyingly clear in the summer of 1452. On the European shore of the Bosphorus Strait, just a few miles north of Constantinople, he began construction of a massive fortress. It stood directly opposite a similar fortress his great-grandfather had built on the Asian shore. Together, the two castles would act as the jaws of a vice, giving Mehmed absolute control over the vital waterway and cutting the city off from any potential grain shipments or military aid from the Black Sea. The scale and speed of the project was staggering. An army of thousands of masons and laborers worked day and night, and in just over 4 months, the fortress was complete. It was a masterpiece of logistics and a public declaration of war. He gave it a name that left no doubt as to its purpose. Ramela Hizra, known colloquially as Boaz Kessin, the throat cutter. For the terrified citizens of Constantinople, watching its walls rise, the message was clear. The noose was tightening. Mehmed was a student of history, and he knew the city's legendary triple-layered Theodosian walls had repelled every attacker for 1,000 years. Swords, arrows, and catapults would not be enough. He needed a new weapon. He needed a revolution. He found it in gunpowder. He was approached by a gifted but disgruntled Hungarian cannon founder named Orban who had first offered his services to the Byzantine Emperor. But the emperor was poor and could not meet his price. Mehmed, by contrast, welcomed him with open arms and gave him functionally unlimited resources, asking only that he build a cannon powerful enough to smash the walls of Babylon itself. Orhan delivered. His creation, the Great Turkish Bombard, was a monster of bronze, over 27 feet long, requiring hundreds of men and dozens of oxmen to move. It could fire a 12,200 pounds marble cannonball over a mile. This was not just one cannon. It was the centerpiece of an entire arsenal of super guns, the largest artillery train the world had ever seen. The coming siege would not be a contest of chivalry. It would be an industrial slaughter. The dawn of a new and terrible age of warfare where 1,000 years of stone fortification would prove helpless against the alchemical power of gunpowder. On the 6th of April 1453, the Symphony of Destruction began. Mehmed's massive army, a force estimated anywhere between 80,000 and 200,000 strong, including elite soldiers, engineers and camp followers, was arrayed before the walls. Inside, a city built for 1 million people was defended by a ghost army of perhaps 7,000 soldiers. They were a mix of proud Byzantine regulars, Italian mercenaries from Genoa and Venice, and armed civilians, a tiny force holding a 14-mile perimeter of walls. They were led by 2 remarkable men. The last Roman Emperor Constantine XI Paleologos, a man determined to die with his city, and Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a charismatic Genoese soldier of fortune and an expert in siege defense. What followed was a 53-day ordeal of terror and endurance. Each day the city was subjected to a relentless, earth-shaking bombardment from Mehmed's super guns. The Great Bombard itself could only be fired 7 times a day, but its impact was apocalyptic, blowing great holes in the ancient stone. And each night, under the cover of darkness, the defenders, men, women, and children, would work tirelessly with wood, rubble, and earth to patch the breaches. Their courage, a fragile shield against the storm. It was a battle of attrition, a contest between overwhelming industrial force and the desperate, unbreakable will to survive. For weeks, a stalemate held. The land walls, though battered and bruised, did not break. The defenders, led by the brilliant Giustiniani, repulsed every assault. More critically, Mehmed's massive fleet was useless. The entrance to the city's key harbor, the Golden Horn, was blocked by a colossal iron chain supported by a line of Byzantine and Italian ships. Without control of the harbor, Mehmed could not attack the city's weaker sea walls. His frustration grew into a rage. He ordered tunnels dug beneath the walls, but the Byzantine countermined and destroyed them. He built massive wooden siege towers, but the defenders burned them with Greek fire. The siege was grinding to a halt, and the Christian world was trying to rally a relief force. It was in this moment of crisis that Mehmed's genius flared into an act of stunning, almost insane audacity. He devised a plan so outrageous his own commanders thought it impossible. If his ships could not sail through the water, he would make them sail over the land. On the night of April 22nd, he put his vision into motion. Under the cover of a massive diversionary bombardment, thousands of his men worked in silence. They constructed a massive road of greased wooden logs, a slipway that ran for over a mile up and over the steep hill of Pera that overlooked the Golden Horn. Then, using brute force, thousands of men and oxen began to physically haul dozens of his smaller warships out of the water, up the hill and down the other side, splashing them into the protected waters of the harbor. When the sun rose the next morning, the defenders looked out from their walls in utter disbelief and horror. The Ottoman fleet was now among them. It was a logistical miracle and a psychological masterpiece. The unbreakable chain had been bypassed. The secure harbor had been breached. For the exhausted defenders, it must have felt as if the laws of nature themselves had been bent to the Sultan's will. Their morale was shattered. The end came on the 29th of May. After a final demand for surrender was met with a dignified refusal from Emperor Constantine, the final all-out assault began before dawn. Mehmed unleashed his army in waves, a calculated strategy to grind the defenders down. First came the irregulars, the Bashi Bazouks. A wave of poorly equipped shock troops sent to absorb the first volley of arrows and exhaust the enemy's strength. They were driven back with heavy losses. Next came the disciplined Anatolian regulars who fought hard but were also repulsed. The defense was holding but just barely. Then, as the sun began to rise, Mehmed played his final card. He rode forward and personally unleashed his ultimate weapon, the Janissaries. They advanced, not with a wild cry, but in disciplined silence, a relentless tide of elite soldiers. The fighting on the walls became a desperate hand-to-hand struggle for survival. At the battle's peak, a cannonball struck near Giustiniani, the heart of the defense, mortally wounding him. His evacuation from the walls caused a panic. And in that moment of chaos, destiny intervened. A small group of Ottoman soldiers discovered that a tiny side gate in the walls, the Kirkaporta, had been left unlocked. They poured through, climbing a nearby tower and planting the Sultan's banner. The sight of the flag behind their lines broke the defenders' spirit completely. The line collapsed into a rout. Emperor Constantine XI, seeing that all was lost, cast off his purple imperial regalia, and with his last loyal men, charged into the oncoming sea of enemies. He died as he had lived, a Roman soldier, and his body was never found, disappearing forever into the storm he could not stop. An empire that had lasted for 1,123 years, the last living remnant of the Roman Empire died with him. As promised, Mehmed gave his troops 3 days to plunder the city. What followed was an orgy of destruction, looting, and enslavement that scarred the memory of the Christian world. But on the third day, the Sultan himself entered the conquered city. He rode not as a triumphant brute, but as a sovereign taking possession of his prize. He went directly to the city's heart, the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral, the largest and most magnificent church in all of Christendom. There he dismounted, bent down and scooped a handful of earth, which he sprinkled over his turban in a traditional gesture of humility before God. He walked inside, marveling at its beauty, and ordered that it be immediately converted into a mosque. The call to Islamic prayer soon echoed through the halls where Byzantine emperors had been crowned for centuries. The fall of Constantinople was a geopolitical earthquake. It sent a shock wave of fear and grief across Europe and would be seen by generations of historians as the true thunderous end of the Middle Ages. The red apple had been picked. The empire was born. With the conquest, Mehmed earned the title he would carry for eternity, Fatih the Conqueror. But his work had only just begun. The great merit of his reign was not the conquest itself, but what he did afterward. He transformed the Ottoman state from a large regional kingdom into a true centralized world-class empire. He moved the capital from Edirne to his new prize, which he began to call Istanbul, and dedicated himself to rebuilding it from the ashes. He issued decrees across his lands inviting Turks, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews to settle in the city, offering them homes and religious freedom. He launched a massive building campaign constructing the Grand Bazaar, new mosques, and his magnificent new imperial residence, the Topkapi Palace. He was no barbarian. He saw himself as a successor to the Roman Caesars, Kaiseri Rum, and he consciously cultivated a sophisticated cosmopolitan court. He invited Italian Renaissance artists like Gentile Bellini to paint his portrait and established libraries filled with classical texts. Mehmed the Conqueror was also Mehmed the Rebuilder, the man who transformed a ruined Christian city into the vibrant multicultural heart of a new global power. But power on this scale casts a long and dark shadow. For every merit of his reign, there was a corresponding sin. The enlightened patron of the arts was also a cold-blooded tyrant who believed the state was supreme over all else, including the bonds of family. To secure his new empire from the destructive civil wars over succession that had plagued his ancestors, Mehmed took a grim occasional custom and codified it into law. In his great legal code, the Canon, he inscribed the infamous law of fratricide. The text is chillingly direct. For the welfare of the state, whichever of my sons succeeds to the throne, it is acceptable for him to kill his brothers. He had transformed political murder into a legal necessity. The logic was brutally pragmatic. The lives of a few princes were an acceptable price to pay for the order and stability of the entire world. This law, however, would have devastating long-term consequences, creating a system where a new sultan's reign began with the blood of his own brothers on his hands. It would eventually lead to the practice of locking princes away in the palace, creating weak and incompetent rulers who would hasten the empire's decline. Thus, the legacy of Mehmed the Conqueror is eternally dual. He was the brilliant architect of a world empire, a man of vision who built a global capital. But he built that empire's foundations upon the cold, hard stone of state-sanctioned murder. The reign of the 10th Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman I, marks the high noon of the empire. This was the golden age, an era of unparalleled power, wealth, and cultural brilliance that dazzled the world. If his predecessors were conquerors, Suleiman was an emperor in the truest sense of the word, a global sovereign who presided over a magnificent court that was the envy of all Europe. He was a contemporary of a generation of titans, the Habsburg Emperor Charles V, Francis I of France, and Henry VIII of England. He saw himself not merely as their equal, but as their superior, the Padishah, the Master King, the shadow of God on earth. In the West, they called him Suleiman the Magnificent, a name inspired by the sheer opulence and splendor of his court. But in his own empire he was known as Kanuni, the lawgiver. This duality is the key to understanding his reign. He was a man who projected an image of absolute power to the outside world. While internally he was a tireless administrator, a reformer of laws and a patron of the arts who perfected the very structure of the state his ancestors had built. His 46-year reign was the longest in Ottoman history, and it represents the absolute zenith, the moment when the empire's political, military, and cultural power reached its farthest extent. Suleiman did not build this power from scratch. He inherited a superpower. His father Selim the Grim was a ruthless and brutally efficient ruler who in a short reign of just 8 years had doubled the empire's size and wealth. Selim had crushed the rival Shia Safavid Empire of Persia at the Battle of Calderon in 1514, securing the Ottoman eastern flank. Then in a stunning lightning campaign from 1516 to 1517 he had completely conquered the Mamluk Sultanate, adding Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina to his domain. This single conquest made the Ottoman Sultan the undisputed caliph of Sunni Islam, the protector of its most sacred sites. When Selim died in 1520, his only son ascended to the throne without the bloody fraternal struggle that had marked previous successions. He inherited a battle-hardened army, a vast treasury, and a secure position as the most powerful monarch in the Muslim world. The stage was perfectly set for a reign of unprecedented ambition. Suleiman's primary stage was Europe, and his great rival was the sprawling Habsburg Empire ruled by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Their epic conflict was a struggle for supremacy, a decades-long war between two global powers. Suleiman's advance into Europe was relentless and seemingly unstoppable. In 1521, his armies captured the formidable fortress of Belgrade, the strategic key that unlocked the gateway to Central Europe. In 1522, after a long and brutal siege, he conquered the island of Rhodes, expelling the Knights of St. John and cementing Ottoman control over the eastern Mediterranean. His most catastrophic victory came in 1526 at the Battle of Mohacs. On a rain-soaked plain in Hungary, the Ottoman army with its superior numbers and artillery utterly annihilated the flower of Hungarian nobility and their king in a battle that lasted just 2 hours. The Kingdom of Hungary was effectively destroyed, opening a vast power vacuum in the heart of the continent. 3 years later in 1529, Suleiman stood before the gates of Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg heartlands. He had reached the symbolic core of his great rival's power. But here, at the gates of Vienna, the Ottoman war machine finally reached its physical limit. Hampered by historically atrocious weather and dangerously overstretched supply lines, the siege failed. Vienna would stand as the high-water mark of Ottoman conquest in Europe, the farthest point their armies would ever reach, defining the tense, fortified frontier between Islam and Christendom for the next 2 centuries. While the Habsburgs preoccupied him in the west, Suleiman waged an equally relentless war against his other great rival, the Safavid Empire of Persia. This was not just a territorial dispute, it was a bitter ideological struggle between the Sunni Ottomans and the Shia Safavids for the spiritual leadership of the Islamic world. Suleiman led multiple campaigns deep into the Iranian plateau. In 1534 he achieved a monumental prize, the capture of Baghdad, the ancient capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. This conquest was a massive symbolic victory, reinforcing his claim as the true successor to the great caliphs of the past. His power was not confined to the land. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman navy became the terror of the Mediterranean. This was the age of the legendary Admiral Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha, an Algerian corsair who entered Suleiman's service and became the Grand Admiral, Capitan Pasha, of his fleet. At the Battle of Preveza in 1538, Barbarossa, commanding a smaller force, outmaneuvered and defeated a massive Holy League fleet assembled by the Christian powers. This single victory secured Ottoman naval supremacy in the Mediterranean for more than 30 years. From their bases in North Africa, Ottoman fleets could raid the coasts of Spain and Italy with impunity, control lucrative trade routes, and project the Sultan's power across a true maritime empire. Spectacular military conquests were only one half of Suleiman's story, the public face of his power. His true passion, the work that would define his legacy within his own empire, was the pursuit of order, justice, and perfection. While his armies were at the frontiers, Suleiman was at the center, acting as the chief administrator and lawgiver of his vast domain. This is why his own people called him Kanuni, the lawgiver. The empire operated under two parallel legal systems: the sacred Sharia law of Islam and the secular sultanic law known as canon. For centuries, the canon laws had been a chaotic patchwork of edicts from previous sultans. Suleiman embarked on a monumental project to collect, reform, and harmonize all of these disparate laws into a single, comprehensive, and coherent legal code, the Great Ottoman Canonym. This work touched every aspect of life. He reformed tax codes to be less burdensome on his non-Muslim subjects. He streamlined the bureaucracy and declared war on corruption, famously handing down harsh punishments to officials who abused their power. His laws defined land tenure, regulated markets, and outlined criminal procedures with meticulous detail. This was not just the work of a conqueror seeking to control his subjects. It was the work of a shepherd tending to his flock, a ruler who believed in a divinely ordained order and saw it as his sacred duty to implement that order on earth. This was the public Suleiman, the wise and just king, the shadow of God, dispensing perfect justice. This obsession with perfect, divine order found its most visible expression not in law books, but in stone and mortar. The golden age of Ottoman power was also the golden age of its architecture, an era defined by one man's genius, Mimar Sinan. A former Janissary military engineer, Sinan was appointed chief imperial architect. Over a 50-year career, he would design more than 300 structures, forever shaping the iconic skyline of Istanbul and the empire. His relationship with Suleiman was one of the great artistic partnerships in history. Its crowning achievement was the magnificent Suleimani Mosque, which still dominates the skyline of Istanbul today. This was far more than a simple place of worship. It was a kalai, a massive charitable complex complete with religious schools, a hospital, a public kitchen for the poor, a library, and public baths. It was a city within a city, a physical manifestation of the Sultan's piety, power, and paternal responsibility for his people. Its vast, perfectly proportioned central dome was designed to surpass that of the Hagia Sophia, symbolizing a perfectly ordered universe under God, with the Sultan as his chosen viceroy on earth. This was the empire at its most confident, its most beautiful, and its most perfect. But behind this flawless public facade of justice and order, a very different drama was unfolding within the silent, gilded walls of the Topkapi Palace. This is the story of the private Suleiman, a man who, for all his absolute power, became ensnared in the deadly intrigues of his own household. At the center of that intrigue was one of the most remarkable women in Ottoman history, Hurrem Sultan, known to the West as Roxolana. Originally a slave girl likely captured in a raid in Ruthenia, modern-day Ukraine, she was brought to the imperial harem. But she was no ordinary concubine. With fierce intelligence, charm, and ambition, she captivated Suleiman in a way no woman ever had before. For her, he shattered centuries of imperial tradition. He ignored other concubines, dedicating himself to her alone. Then, in an act that scandalized the court, he formally freed her from slavery and made her his legal wife, creating for her the new, powerful title of Hasiki Sultan. A slave had become an empress. Hurrem understood the brutal logic of the Ottoman court. Her position and the lives of her sons were only secure if she could eliminate all rivals. She faced two great obstacles: The first was Pargali Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's Grand Vizier, his closest childhood friend, and the second most powerful man in the empire. The second was Prince Mustafa, Suleiman's talented eldest son by another woman, a man who was wildly popular with the army and the people, and the undisputed heir to the throne. The first to fall was Ibrahim. The bond between Suleiman and his Grand Vizier was legendary. They were brothers in all but blood. But as Ibrahim's power grew, so did his arrogance. Hurrem skillfully exploited this, planting seeds of poison in the Sultan's ear, suggesting that his friend's ambition was a threat to the throne itself. In March of 1536, the end came swiftly and silently. After sharing a private dinner with the Sultan, Ibrahim retired to his chambers in the palace. The next morning, he was found strangled by order of the very man who had called him brother. It was an act of political paranoia that Suleiman would reportedly regret for the rest of his days. But Hurrem's greatest obstacle remained Prince Mustafa. As her own sons came of age, Mustafa's existence became an existential threat. For years, Hurrem and her powerful allies, including her son-in-law, the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, orchestrated a masterful campaign of slander. They intercepted letters, forged correspondence, and whispered rumors that Mustafa, beloved by the Janissaries, was plotting with the Persian Shah to overthrow his own father. The aging Suleiman, isolated in his palace and consumed by suspicion, eventually believed them. In 1553, during a campaign against Persia, he summoned Mustafa to his tent. The prince, despite warnings from his advisors, obeyed his father's call. As he entered the imperial tent, he was ambushed by the Sultan's deaf-mute executioners. He was overpowered and garroted with a silk bowstring, all while his own father, Suleiman, allegedly watched from behind a screen. The army was on the verge of open rebellion at the murder of their favorite prince. It was the great sin of Suleiman's magnificent reign, a moment where the great lawgiver, blinded by intrigue and fear, destroyed his most capable son and the empire's best hope for a stable future. The golden facade of the perfect state now had a deep and undeniable crack. In 1566, at the age of 71, Suleiman died as he had lived, on a military campaign during the siege of Sigedvar in Hungary. He left behind an empire that was unquestionably the most powerful in the world. It was an empire at its absolute apex, stretching from the gates of Vienna to the Persian Gulf, from the plains of Ukraine to the deserts of Yemen. Under his 46-year rule, the Ottoman state had been perfected. Its legal system was a model of clarity. Its capital, Istanbul, was a cosmopolitan jewel, the largest city in Europe. The domes and minarets designed by Mimar Sinan defined a new and sublime architectural language. The empire he passed on to his successor, Selim II, was a global superpower at the zenith of its prestige. This was the golden age of the House of Osman, a period of breathtaking achievement, and it was overwhelmingly the creation of one man. And yet, history is filled with cruel ironies. The brightest sun casts the darkest shadow. The very greatness of Suleiman's reign concealed the seeds of the long, slow decline that was to follow. His deep love for Hurrem Sultan, while a testament to their personal bond, had shattered tradition and permanently elevated the political power of the harem. He had created a precedent for female influence that would evolve into the destabilizing Sultanate of Women, where favorites, concubines, and queen mothers would wield immense power from behind the curtain, often to the detriment of the state. His paranoid execution of his most capable son, Mustafa, established a terrible pattern, ensuring that future successions would be defined by fear, fratricide, and intrigue, often leading to the weakest rather than the strongest prince taking the throne. And by perfecting the institutions of the state, he also made them rigid. The very systems he codified, from the Janissary core to the court bureaucracy, would become deeply conservative forces in the centuries to come, resistant to the changes necessary to adapt to a changing world. The sun is at its most brilliant at high noon. But it is at that exact moment that it begins its inevitable, imperceptible descent toward the horizon. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent was the glorious, blinding and tragic high noon of the Ottoman Empire. Traditional histories often portray the century after Suleiman as an era of decline, a long, slow decay presided over by a string of weak, incompetent or insane sultans. The blame for this decline is frequently placed upon the meddling of women. But this narrative is too simple. It mistakes a change in the nature of power for a complete absence of it. The Sultanate of Women was not a power vacuum, it was a power shift. As the authority of the Sultan himself began to wane, power did not simply vanish. It migrated. It moved from the public, male-dominated world of the Divan Council and the battlefield into the private, secretive and exclusively female world of the imperial harem. The Game of Thrones continued, but the players, the rules and the weapons all changed. The new game was played not with armies but with whispers, not with cannons but with poison, and not in grand campaigns, but in the gilded corridors of the palace through treacherous alliances with eunuchs and Janissaries. Was this truly a sign of decay? Or was it a testament to the strange adaptive resilience of the Ottoman system itself? A system where power when blocked simply carves a new and more dangerous riverbed. This unprecedented transfer of power was not an accident. It was the result of three fundamental changes in the structure of the Ottoman state. Changes that began even under Suleiman himself. The first was the end of the age of easy expansion. By the late 16th century, the empire's borders had largely stabilized against powerful and entrenched enemies like the Habsburgs in Europe and the Safavids in Persia. This had a profound effect on the role of the Sultan. For centuries, the Sultan's primary function and source of legitimacy had been his role as a Ghazi, a warrior king who personally led his armies to victory. But with fewer glorious campaigns to command, the sultans began to retreat from the battlefield and from public life, withdrawing into the secluded luxury and ritualized ceremony of the Topkapi Palace. The warrior king was replaced by the palace-bound sovereign. This physical withdrawal from the world led to a political withdrawal, creating a vacuum of active leadership at the very top of the imperial structure. The second change was a direct response to the brutal law of fratricide. As the centuries passed, the practice of a new sultan executing all of his brothers came to be seen as not only barbaric, but dangerously wasteful, wiping out the dynasty's spare heirs in a single stroke. So, it was gradually replaced by a system that was in its own way just as cruel, the Kafes or the cage. Instead of being killed, the brothers and nephews of the reigning sultan were now confined for life to a set of opulent but isolated apartments within the harem. They lived a life of gilded imprisonment, surrounded by luxury, but cut off from the outside world with no administrative training, no military experience, and under the constant shadow of the executioner's bowstring. The Kafes solved the problem of fratricidal civil wars, but it created a new and more insidious one. It began to produce catastrophically flawed rulers. When a prince was finally called to the throne, often after decades of this paranoid confinement, he was typically psychologically damaged, hopelessly inexperienced, and utterly incapable of governing the vast empire that was suddenly thrust upon him. With a weak, damaged, and incompetent sultan on the throne, who would fill this vacuum of authority? The answer was almost always the one person who had known the new ruler his entire life. The one person he trusted. The one person who had a vested interest in his survival, his mother. This was the dawn of the age of the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother. By default, the Valide Sultan became the most powerful individual in the empire. As the matriarch of the dynasty, she commanded immense respect and controlled a vast personal fortune. As the head of the harem, she managed a complex political and social ecosystem. And most importantly, she had the ear and the trust of her fragile son. These powerful mothers formed alliances with grand viziers and generals, effectively ruling the empire as regents, sometimes formally, sometimes informally through the puppet figure of the sultan. The era of the great sultans had ended. The era of the great sultan's mothers had begun. The path to this new world was blazed by Hurrem Sultan. While she herself ruled alongside a strong and capable husband in Suleiman, she fundamentally altered the political landscape. By transitioning from slave to legal wife and by creating the powerful new role of the Hasiki Sultan, she carved out an institutional space for female power at the very center of the state. She proved that a woman from the seclusion of the harem could influence foreign policy, dictate the succession and orchestrate the downfall of the most powerful men in the empire. She created the blueprint. The women who came after her would not just follow it, they would expand upon it, building an empire within an empire. The generation after Hurrem saw her model perfected by two formidable women. The first was Nurbanu Sultan, a woman of alleged Venetian noble birth. She was the Hasiki to Hurrem's dissipated son, Selim II, and later the powerful Valide Sultan to her own son Murad III. With both a weak husband and a weak son on the throne, Nurbanu became the effective head of government for nearly 2 decades. She managed the empire's affairs, promoted a pro-Venetian foreign policy, and famously corresponded as an equal with Catherine de' Medici, the great Queen Mother of France. Power then passed to her bitter rival, Safavi Sultan. Safavi was the favorite of Murad III and the Valide Sultan to his son Mem III. Safavi's power was legendary, as was her greed. She controlled imperial appointments and effectively ran her own foreign policy, exchanging letters and lavish gifts with Queen Elizabeth I of England. She accumulated a personal fortune of staggering proportions, often by accepting enormous bribes from foreign envoys and petitioners seeking her favor. The imperial harem had become not just the center of political power but a hub of international diplomacy and vast systemic corruption. This trend reached its absolute apex with the rise of the single most powerful woman in Ottoman history, Kozum Sultan. Her extraordinary career spanned the reigns of 6 different sultans, and for much of that half-century she was the true ruler of the empire. She began as the beloved Hasiki of Sultan Ahmed I. After his death she was briefly sidelined but returned with a vengeance as the Valide Sultan and the official regent for her 11-year-old son Murad IV. When Murad came of age and began to rule with an iron fist, Kozum was forced into the background. But when he died without an heir, she emerged once more to rule as regent for her other son, the deeply mentally unstable Ibrahim the Mad. When the court finally had enough of Ibrahim's excesses and had him deposed and executed, Kozum achieved something unprecedented. She placed her 7-year-old grandson, Mehmed IV, on the throne and had herself declared regent for a 3rd time, inventing the new title of Bayak Valide or Grand Valide Sultan. For nearly 3 decades, with only brief interruptions, Kozum was the empress of the Ottoman world. She attended meetings of the State Council from behind a curtain. Her whispers confirming or rejecting appointments, dictating policy, and controlling the imperial treasury. But this unprecedented consolidation of power in one woman's hands could not last. Kozum the Grand Valide had a rival, the mother of the child sultan, a younger and ambitious woman named Turhan Hadisi. As the new official Valide Sultan, Turhan believed that she, not her aging mother-in-law, was the rightful regent. A bitter and deadly power struggle erupted between the two women. A battle of matriarchs that split the palace and the government into warring factions. The final bloody climax came in September of 1651. Kozum, feeling her influence slipping, allegedly hatched a plot to have her 7-year-old grandson Mehmed poisoned. She would then place another younger grandson on the throne, whose mother was more pliable, but Turhan was warned of the plot. She acted first. In the middle of the night, Turhan's loyalists, led by the chief black eunuch, stormed the harem. They hunted down the 60-year-old Kozum, who was found hiding in a furnishing chest. She was dragged out and brutally strangled to death, some say with a curtain from her own chamber. The murder of the most powerful woman the empire had ever known, carried out by the order of her own daughter-in-law, was a shocking and violent end to an extraordinary era. The Sultanate of Women was over. Drowned in its own blood. Power would now begin to shift once more away from the harem and into the hands of a new political force, a dynasty of iron-willed grand viziers. The most direct legacy of this tumultuous century was the catastrophic erosion of the Sultan's personal authority. The office once held by world-conquering titans like Mehmed and Suleiman was now more often than not occupied by damaged incompetents, debauched madmen, or powerless children. The Sultan, once the unchallengeable center of the Ottoman universe, was reduced to a symbolic figurehead, a sacred prisoner in his own palace, while the real business of power was conducted by his mother, his wife, or the factions they controlled. This period of chronic instability, rampant corruption, and bloody infighting undoubtedly damaged the empire. It diverted attention from critical external threats, encouraged nepotism, and fatally eroded the discipline of core institutions like the Janissary Corps, who became kingmakers, learning that they could install and depose sultans at will. The awe and terror that the Sultanate had once inspired had been replaced by contempt. The Game of Thrones continued, but the players, the rules, and the weapons all changed. The new game was played not with armies on a battlefield, but with whispers in corridors, not with cannons but with poison, and not in grand campaigns, but in the gilded shadows of the palace through treacherous alliances forged with eunuchs and janissaries.